Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of the Scannell Agenda. My name is Stephen Scannell, and today's show is called Review, show number 82. Today's date is March 26, 2018. My mom used to say that, review. She was a pretty sharp cookie. And she remembered all her Latin prayers right up till the end, till she died. Some reason, all that review that she did, she could still, even as she was getting old and, getting senile, she could go ahead and, pray in Latin, which I was pretty impressed with. Anyway, review. So today what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time on some of the tidbits that I've thrown out there for you. See, my history is basically for this purpose here is that my dad was a planner and I like to plan, and he raised me. So I see myself as kind of a super planner on steroids. Dad was very modest, and I'm not. Dad got a late start. I got an early start. And Dad gave me a lot, so planning was his deal. He was chairman of the planning board, and most of my planning is based on the clipboard work that I do. And I have projects, and these projects are around 250 different categories. And I was calculating today that let's say if 2,000 pages is about a foot, and then I have about 7 feet tall, if you stacked them all up, of all these clipboard notes, you might call them, well, then that would be about 14,000 pages. So my attitude, as I've explained before, is to go with ratios. Let's say, I used to say, if 1 in 30 ideas is good, then I'm fantastically pleased with that. And that's being very optimistic, of course. So maybe 1 in 300 ideas is pretty darn good. I hope that's true. So I have a history of designing windmills, as you will find out when this gets published, all this work that I do. And I have a first-generation windmills, second-generation windmills, and third-generation windmills. The first-generation windmills are your basic, what I call whirligig. They just look like a windmill. These are the Georges Bank mega mills, the Nauset mills, and other windmills that are kind of standard looking. When I was a kid designing windmills, 18, I contracted with this guy who was in the patent field, Donald Meeker, I think his name was, and he did a patent search because I thought I had stumbled onto a great idea with a horizontal shaft windmill, which I still think is pretty darn good. Those should be pretty sturdy windmills. The second generation windmill would be in the lines of what I call a Venturi windmills. And these can be an array of windmills that are miles long. And they have a long cowling, and then they're ducted, basically. The Venturi is a ducting system which concentrates the air, pressurizes the air, and increases the air's velocity. And then the third generation windmill I call the square rig mills, or the line puller mills. And these are used down in the Antarctic mainly. And it's quite an expense. If you think of a square rig ship, and I explained on one of the shows that there was this ship called the Prusson, which was going about 18 or so knots, really moving along in a good stiff breeze. And there was a collision between a steamboat. Somebody was trying to overtake somebody. I think the steamboat was at fault. And then the Prussen went down. It was a big, huge German square rig ship in the nitrate business for South America, fertilizer. So I guess the calculation was that was about a 5,000 horsepower to 6,000 horsepower is what it took to push the vessel with that. So you're looking at harnessing quite a few horses here with the wind. Now that later on translated into this system that I call the green grid transit system, because I couldn't devise a way, practically speaking, to ship and store the energy, or rather to transmit electricity inshore. So what I came up with initially was kind of a wide gauge, 2 pipes rather than 2, let's say 4-foot 8-inch rails, steel rails. I had wider, like a 20 gauge composite pipes that lighter weight trains would run on. And now most of my work is just strictly the monorail system, which I call the dovetail track, which looks like a dovetail. It's flat on top, comes in like this, just like a dovetail joint. And then the train wraps around that, so there'll be no derailments unless you blew the whole thing to smithereens. I guess that's about the only way you could derail it. So, as I've mentioned before, I design comprehensive, complex systems for the public trust, and it is fun. I have a lot of enjoyment out of this. And I think I'd like to say thanks to my dad, because I think he was really enjoying his work too. He was a pretty serious guy, but he had a good sense of humor. And I do love to plan, whether it's energy systems or fishery systems or ports, or even this little project I'm working on now, the Andrews River foot-long shanty. I think that is just so much fun. I love that kind of work. I call it work. So my history also is, had a vehicular homicide. That was October 26, 1975. That was in Harwich on the corner of Route 28 and Snow Inn Road. And I was as guilty could be, as guilty as sin, and then I did the wrong thing and I didn't handle it properly. Kind of tried to lie my way out of it. I was 18, a little older than 18. So, and I was high on grass. That's what that was. And stupid. And young. So that's part of my history. I used to go out fishing. I used to work at the boat yards as a kid. Everything from paper route to you name it. I worked hard. I was quite a worker. I worked at Allen Harbor Marine Service for like 3 or 4 years. I worked for a lady, Priscilla Skank, down in Harwich Port on Walther Road. She had 3 different yachts, and worked for her. She was a lovely lady. With cerebral palsy, it was tough to go fishing, but that's where my roots are for disability work. And as I mentioned, we would put her hand would hold a monofilament line, and then we'd have an umbrella rig usually, and she could really tell when the fish was on. And boy, we'd hear about that. And then I'd haul the fish in, hopefully not lose it. She'd catch it, I'd lose it. Okay, so we have here a doable green energy for the world system. So that's my biggest project, not fishery management, but this energy system is certainly bigger than life, really. It's huge. Now, the basics of this are bundled pipes. So if you can picture pipes in a bundle, I call it the 7-pipe. These are composites generally. They could be made out of anything, but I have it rigged as composites. Now, in the pipes are many, many different utilities, and many different energy components or fuels. I like to call compressed air fuel, which it isn't, but I like to call it a fuel. Now, hydrogen, you can call that a fuel, and I call that frozen electricity. So these are all things that go in the pipe. And since you're cracking water, you're getting hydrogen and oxygen. So I've also come up with the ORCA, oxygen-rich compressed air. I call that ORCA. So these I call the three green fuels of the future: hydrogen, compressed air, and ORCA. Now these go in the monorail backbone, which are the bundled pipes. So our energy is carried by these pipes, and the transportation system, which is the green grid T, that's carried by all these pipes, and it gets quite complex. Now you can carry a lot more, like the commercial says, now how much would you pay? You know, add this, add this, add this. Well, this is ridiculous because you can almost add everything to this system. Water husbandry. We have a lot of rain, a lot of floods, and the water, you know, piles up and floods everyone out. But with water husbandry, using this system, we have large diameter pipes with mega horsepower pumps, huge horsepower. And I've got this horsepower rated pretty high because 8,000 psi can come in some of the pipes for these purposes. And that's just ridiculous amounts of horsepower there. So large diameter pipes pumping water to mitigate floods up to reservoirs and holding tanks, etc. And potable water, that's another story. So these multiple lines that we use to carry the monorail systems are being used for multiple different water usages. There are multiples of water, and then of course sanitation uses that we need if we had right now, if we had the system in place. It would change our sanitation systems completely, and that's what I'm proposing. So things like algae water for irrigation, or known as T, you know, and then salt water can also be put in pipes. You can have inland salt ponds for aquaculture, etc. Gray water, that's your shower water, some of your sink water, and urine. Whether it's human or farm, these can be used because your urine is basically just like commercial fertilizer in that its chemical breakdowns of potassium and nitrogen and phosphorus are basically, you know, it's almost mimicking the commercial grade fertilizers that are used today. And of course, black water is our current system. We just mix everything together and we pump it to a location, and then we try to poison it and hide it and all that stuff. That's what I'm saying are the dinosaur systems that we use. So at-sea biotreatment systems will be the future, I believe, where we pump down our bioproducts, I call them, number one and number two. You pump them down in whatever form that you're using, and then you barge them or pipe them to distant locations where you have biotreatment. Could be eelgrass, could be bamboo at sea, could be a lot of different things. So water systems in these pipes that carry the monorail are huge. Many different water systems. Many different sanitation products can be used, put in the pipes in their own category. You see, when you mix the urine and the fecal matter, which is what we do, you really mitigate the value. You lose the value, rather, of both. Both are much more valuable when they're separated out and used for biotreatments. And these are all closed systems, not to be used on a farm for food, of course. You understand that. Now how much would you pay? Okay, we'll add natural gas in this bundle of pipe that carries the monorail. So I'm saying I solved the energy crisis if it's possible that at this late date we could solve, the energy crisis and global warming. This is it. Because it's eminently doable financially because of all these different cash flows, I call them. The cash flows are where it's at. So natural gas, if you look at a map of natural gas pipes in the country, it looks like spaghetti. It's intense. There's a lot of natural gas pipes. And they're getting kind of old right now. And by the way, we had pipes going in on Great Western Road there in Dennis and Harwich, and it's a lot of money to put in a pipe underground. So the cost of natural gas pipage is just enormous. So you add these into the bundle. Natural gas goes into the bundle that carries the monorail, green grid T. Okay, let's move on to things that don't necessarily go in the pipes themselves, but are carried. Oh, broadband. I'm sorry, we got to backtrack here. Broadband is something kind of different that goes in the pipe. It's cabling that goes in the pipe. The pipe is a conduit for the cable, and that means big money. That will carry, let's say, 30 to 40% of the cost of the whole system. We can put that on the backs of everyone that uses a computer and a cell phone and a television. That's my thinking on that. And the cost is going to be low, but the profits going into what I call the Love Power Grid Consortium, that would be the legal and financial vehicle that this would be housed in. That would be the umbrella. So if this is doable, it solves the energy crisis because, no, it's not, as I said, a perpetual motion machine of any kind. All it is simply is a synthesis of systems that can be done financially, together, bundled together, all these systems. Now, if it is true that it can be done, then we can have hydrogen everywhere. Hydrogen from offshore windmills, maybe of my design, will be everywhere. That means electricity from the hydrogen, which is almost instantaneous with fuel cells. They even have little tractor-trailer trucks in LA that run on hydrogen. Hydrogen's incredibly expensive because of the horsepower needed to make it. However, that will change with these windmills that make hydrogen compressed air. That I'm banking on. We have to have reasonably priced hydrogen for this system to work. So if you think of a windmill, some of these second-generation windmills, which are pretty easy and doable to build, they'll produce a lot of hydrogen. These are massive windmill installations way offshore for the purposes of electricity inshore. But I think we know that with the wind being intermittent, we can't ship the electricity from offshore to inshore. So, but we can bottle the electricity, or as I say, put it in this pipe. So that's kinetic energy. That's your electricity. And your mechanical energy, like the compressed air, can be used for air conditioning and refrigeration. Now, they have been coming along with a lot of ideas about compressed air cars. I think the electric cars might be the thing to do. Most people feel that way. And then everyone will have hydrogen lines into their homes. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a buried line. It can be up on the telephone poles, up in the wires, probably a 2-inch line that carries very low pressure hydrogen and then a little bit of low pressure compressed air, let's say 200 or 300 pounds PSI. But very, very low pressure hydrogen. We don't want that pressurized too much because of the safety issues. And then in your home, you've got some hydrogen tankage that's buried. And so you have electricity on tap from the windmills in your home in the form of the hydrogen. And your compressed air, that runs your AC at home, that runs your refrigerator at home. And all set, right? All set. You know, your water systems come from these great monorails, and it's just a lot bundled into one system. I call it a mega system. So it does solve the energy crisis, and I do know that as a boat yard worker, boat builder, just a guy who's been building things all his life basically, and fishing. You know when something's going to work. And the first 5 minutes, when I had that idea to bring in the compressed air and hydrogen and use that on these rail lines, which I now consider obsolete. I like the monorails better. But in the first 5 minutes, I knew that I had solved the energy crisis, because that's what we need. We don't necessarily need cheaper ways to produce hydrogen. What we need is ideal ways to ship and store the hydrogen, the compressed air, and the Orca. So that's it. I think that solves the energy crisis. There's so many different things that this system can also be used for. I have a big sand dredge file, and some of my best work is these at-sea systems that gather up sand and then ship it on these rail lines. I call the dovetail system a glorified rail line. And then that we can use that to build up Nauset Beach and Nantucket beaches and Martha's Vineyard. And so there's multiple uses for this kind of technology. It's marine technologies, and that's my specialty. Okay. So, so I had time on my hands because of the persecution, I call it, over the pond issue, and the huge fight over this stupid issue. And so I had the time, so I did it. I went for that brass ring, as they say. Grabbed the brass ring. Yep. I've solved the energy crisis. I'm certain of it. I've tried to get MIT to even look at it, but they won't. Maybe they're not. Maybe I'm really not getting through to them. I don't know. I mean, maybe I should put a stamp on an envelope. That's the only way you can really be sure. So the storage of hydrogen and the storage of compressed air energy systems, that's CAES is what is known as compressed air power. It stands for compressed air energy storage. And then ORCA, I call that oxygen-rich compressed air. The shipment and the storage together, shipment and storage together, is what solves the energy crisis, not some windmill I designed. Although, it's wonderful windmills that I've designed. But this business of the synergy that all these systems and the symbiosis that they all have, and they're all off the shelf. Everything I'm doing here is basically off the shelf. But I am counting on hydrogen being cheaper to produce with massive wind installations offshore, massive wave generators offshore. And I go back to that ship, the Prusson, using 5,000 to 6,000 horsepower from the wind. This is a sailboat, 110 years old. I mean, back in history, rather. So that's big. Wind energy is big. you know, when the wind really blows and really you can make the money. So the double and triple dovetail tracks will be used for large car carriage of containers, land yachts that also double as sea yachts. Because if we design it right, your containers will be traveling from Los Angeles to Savannah, Georgia, and they will be traveling, you know, sideways, not fore and aft. Okay, 2 minutes. So I have solved the energy crisis. I've said this before in a show. I just wanted to review why I think I have solved the energy crisis. It's a matter of mechanicals. That's all it is. It's a matter of, okay, add up the mechanicals and the financials and see what you got and run the numbers, model it up, whatever you know, do the modeling. So it's so important to do the modeling. And financially, when you start adding all these things up, the additive nature of, you know, is this system doable if it's only for this, a few things, makes it tough. But when you start adding up everything that you use this for, then it's really good. So we're going to have pods for pallets and people, not just the trains, okay? And the roads can also be put on these, with these systems. And also, you know, antennas for the communications all along the line, because these monorails will be up a little higher than you might expect. And I've got it about 100 or 120 feet high. Packages delivered by United States Postal Service, and the mail, and milk. Anything you want at the store goes right on these systems. And that would be, you know, robotic little carts that go from here to there. Everything from yoga to yogurt. Okay, that's the Scannell agenda. Thanks for watching.